The Grand Synod of the Ethelgard did not know fear, for fear was a biological inefficiency rooted in the ignorance of variables, and the Synod knew everything. They sat, or hovered, or sprawled within the obsidian amphitheater, a structure so vast that its ceiling was lost in the atmospheric haze of the capital world. A structure built from the bones of dead stars and the solidified will of a dozen conquered epochs. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, burning spice, and the metallic tang of ancient, recycled oxygen pumped through filtration systems that had been humming since before humanity had discovered fire. High Counselor Vian, a being of crystalline latticework and suspended light, shifted his weight upon the gravity dais. His body, a masterpiece of silicon evolution, chimed softly, a sound that usually signaled contemplation, but now, to those who knew the frequency of his stress, betrayed a terrifying dissonance. He looked down at the data stream flowing like a river of liquid mercury across the central table, a holographic projection that refused to stabilize. It was a chaotic, swirling mess of trajectories and energy signatures that defied the golden ratio, the mathematical perfection upon which the Galactic Council had based its 10,000-year reign. Beside him, encased in armor crafted from the carapace of void leviathans, sat War Master Krog. The Kravik general was a mountain of muscle and chitin, his breathing a wet, rasping rhythm that echoed the ventilation cycles of the chamber. Krog did not chime. He growled, a low-frequency rumble that vibrated in the chests of the lesser delegates seated in the shadowed tiers above. They were discussing the anomaly. They were discussing the species that had emerged from the silence of the galactic spiral's trailing arm, a region designated as the Null Sector, a graveyard of failed civilizations and radioactive dust. The Council had ignored the Null Sector for millennia, content in the knowledge that nothing of value could grow in such dark soil. They were wrong. The realization hung in the chamber, heavy and suffocating. The report on the table was not a declaration of war, nor was it a diplomatic envoy. It was a sensor ghost, a reading of an event that had occurred 3 cycles ago in a system the Council had marked as uninhabitable. A star had been dying there, a red giant, swollen and angry, preparing to collapse and swallow its planetary children. By all metrics of the High Synod, the system should have been incinerated. The grand equation dictated it. Entropy demanded it. Yet the star burned yellow now. It had been stabilized. Someone or something had reached into the heart of a stellar fusion reaction and performed surgery on a sun. Vian's crystalline fingers tapped against the obsidian armrest, a frantic rhythm. To reignite a star was impossible for the Council's science. To do so without leaving a trace of the machinery used was terrifying. The species responsible had left only a single repeating transmission in the wake of the miracle, a code that translated into a primitive, guttural dialect. It read simply, "We are here to help." "It is a trick," Krog rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. The War Master's 4 eyes, milky with age and violence, narrowed at the holographic star. "No biological entity possesses the thermal tolerance to approach a red giant, let alone the kinetic capacity to compress its core. This is a weapon test. They demonstrate their power by saving a dead system to mock us. They tell us they can manipulate stellar mass. If they can fix a sun, they can detonate one." Logic was sound in the brutal, paranoid fashion of the Kravik, whose history was written in the blood of preemptive strikes. But Vian was not so sure. The architect of the Xylofian ascendancy looked at the data again, searching for the aggressive vector, the weapon's signature. There was none. There was only the impossible preservation of life. "We cannot assume malice merely because we lack understanding, War Master," Vian chimed, though his light dimmed with uncertainty. "However, the scale of this intervention. It disrupts the order. If a new power has risen in the Null Sector, one capable of stellar engineering, our hegemony is already challenged. We are the guardians of the galaxy because we hold the highest technology. If we are surpassed, we are obsolete." The third member of the triumvirate, High Speaker Alara of the Osul Weavers, drifted forward. She was a being of mist and silk, her physical form barely coherent, held together by a containment suit of golden filigree. Her people were the spies, the diplomats, the whispers in the dark. "We have observed them," Alara whispered, her voice projecting directly into the minds of the counselors, a telepathic caress that felt cold and invasive. "My shadows have watched their borders. They call themselves Terrans. Humans, they are. Confusing, they are short-lived, volatile, prone to inter. Now conflict and illogical bursts of emotion. Their biology is fragile. They bleed easily, they succumb to radiation, they require sleep, they age rapidly. By all accounts, they should have extinguished themselves before leaving their gravity well. And yet, She paused, and the mercury stream on the table shifted to show a fleet. Not the sleek, geometric perfection of the Council's armada, but a ragtag collection of bulky, scarred vessels. Ships that looked like they had been hammered together from scrap and stubbornness. They bore the scars of micrometeoroids and plasma burns. They were ugly, they were utilitarian, and they were everywhere. They do not conquer, Alara continued, the image zooming in on a human vessel hanging in the void. We watched them enter the Valeri Drift, a region plagued by ionic storms. A council fleet would have bypassed it. The humans entered it. They lost ships. They died in the hundreds, but they established a beacon chain to guide others through. They sacrifice the individual for the abstract concept of safety for strangers. They act against the survival instinct. Krog slammed a fist onto the table, cracking the obsidian. Weakness. A species that throws away its lives is a species that does not value them. They are a swarm, nothing more. A plague of altruism that will consume resources to save the unworthy. If they come here to the Spire, we must show them the face of authority. We must demand they submit their technology for inspection. We cannot allow unauthorized stellar manipulation in Council space. Vian calculated the probabilities. The humans had requested an audience. Or rather, they had stated they were coming. They had not asked for permission. That alone was an insult the Council had not suffered in 10,000 years. The atmosphere in the amphitheater shifted from debate to dread as the proximity alarms began to wail, a sound not heard since the Great Schism. The human delegation had arrived. They had bypassed the outer markers. They had slipped through the blockade sensors not by stealth, but by moving through the hyperspace undertow, the dangerous currents of subspace that tore conventional drives apart. It was a maneuver of madness. Vian watched the main viewscreen as the clouds of Ethelgard parted. He expected a dreadnought, a massive projection of power to match the Council's grandeur. He expected gold and chrome. What descended through the atmosphere was a dark, brooding monolith of a ship, shaped like a spearhead, its hull matte black and absorbing the light of the local sun. It had no visible weapon ports, no glowing engines of intimidation. It simply was. It hung over the celestial spire, casting a shadow that swallowed the golden towers of the administration district. The sheer mass of the vessel displaced the air with a thunderclap that rattled the bones of the councilors. It did not hover with the grace of anti-gravity fields. It powered down with the roar of retro-thrusters, burning the landing pad with chemical fire, scarring the pristine white stone of the Council's sacred port. It was a statement. We do not float above you. We stand upon your ground. The silence that followed the landing was absolute. The dust settled. The heat shimmered off the black hull. The councilors composed themselves. Krog tightened his grip on his ceremonial plasmalance. Vian adjusted his light refraction to project maximum authority. Alara retreated into her containment suit, her mind reaching out to scan the minds of the arrivals, only to find a wall of static, psychic dampeners. The humans were prepared. The airlock of the black ship hissed open, not with a musical chime, but with the groan of hydraulics and the release of pressurized gas. A ramp extended, slamming into the stone. There were no honor guards, no trumpets, no display of holographic art. A single figure walked down the ramp. He was small compared to the towering Krog, frail compared to the crystalline Vian. He wore a suit of dark fabric, cut simply, and he leaned on a cane made of polished wood. He was old. His hair was white, his face a map of deep lines and sun damage. He walked slowly, painfully, every step a conquest of gravity. Behind him walked two others, younger, carrying heavy metal cases, their faces obscured by helmets that reflected the Council's grandeur back at them without comment. The human ambassador stopped in the center of the obsidian amphitheater. He looked up at the tiers of alien delegates, thousands of species watching him with judgment, fear, and arrogance. He did not bow. He did not kneel. He adjusted his collar, planted his cane on the floor, and looked directly at the triumvirate. His eyes were dark, tired, and incredibly ancient in a way that had nothing to do with biological age. "I am Elias Thorn," the human said. His voice was not amplified by technology, yet it carried through the acoustic perfection of the hall. It was a gravelly voice, textured with smoke and tim. I speak for the Terran Union. You asked us to explain the star in Sector Null. I am here to explain." Vian looked down at the small creature. "You stand before the High Synod, Elias Thorn. You stand before the architects of the galaxy. You have violated the Treaty of Borders. You have utilized forbidden technology. You have trespassed. Do you offer surrender or justification?" Thorn smiled, a dry, humorless expression. "Justification is for the guilty counselor, and surrender is for the defeated. We are neither." The arrogance of the statement sent a ripple of murmurs through the hall. Krog growled, standing to his full height, a towering 3 meters of death. You speak with a loud voice for such a soft shell, the War Master boomed. Your ship is scarred, your body is failing, you limp. You are a species of scavengers playing at godhood. You fixed a star, impossible. You found a relic of the precursors and activated it. Admit this, and perhaps we will allow you to serve us as technicians. Thorn looked at the giant reptile, his expression unchanging. He tapped his cane on the obsidian floor. We bleed, yes. We die, yes. That is why we are in a hurry, War Master. We do not have the luxury of your 10,000-year debates. We do not have the time to sit in stone halls and discuss the philosophy of ownership while the universe darkens. Thorn signaled to his aides. They placed the metal cases on the floor and opened them. There were no weapons inside. There were simple, primitive-looking data cores, hard drives. You call the null sector a graveyard, Thorn said, his voice dropping lower, compelling the council to lean in. You avoided it because your sensors detected high radiation and instability. You feared the chaos, so you built a wall around your empire and looked inward. You call that order. We call it blindness. He picked up a small holographic projector from the case. We went into the null sector because we heard a signal, not a transmission, a heartbeat. He activated the device. The air in the center of the amphitheater shimmered and resolved into a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. But it was different from the Council's maps. The Council's maps showed borders, resources, trade routes. The human map showed flow. It showed currents of energy, gravitational tides, and the dark matter web connecting the stars. And at the edge of the spiral, where the null sector lay, there was a rot, a festering purple bruise spreading inward. We didn't fix the star in sector null to show off, Thorn said quietly. We fixed it because it was being eaten. The image zoomed in. The purple rot was consuming the star, draining its fusion energy, turning it into a husk. There is a fissure in the vacuum, Thorn explained, using terms that the Council's translators struggled to interpret. An entropy cascade. It started millions of years ago. It's what killed the civilizations in the null sector. It's not radiation. It's the breakdown of physical laws, and it is spreading. Vian's light flickered violently. Impossible. The great equation is stable. If such a decay existed, we would have seen it. Thorn shook his head. You didn't see it because you were looking for enemies. You were looking for fleets to fight, resources to hoard. You weren't looking at the foundation of the house because you were too busy arguing over the furniture. The insult stung, but the visual data was undeniable. The rot was moving toward the Council worlds. We are not here to conquer you, Thorn continued, pacing slowly around the projection. We are here to warn you. The Terran Union has spent the last 2 centuries acting as a dike against this flood. We have been terraforming dead worlds not for expansion, but to create gravity anchors to hold the fabric of space together. We reignited that star to act as a plug. We are the janitors of this galaxy, counselors. We are cleaning up the mess that the universe makes when it gets old. Krog sat down slowly, the rage draining from his posture, replaced by a confusion that was far more dangerous. You claim you are fighting a war against nature itself. Nature is indifferent, Thorn corrected. We are fighting against silence. He looked at Alara. You probed our minds, you felt the static. That isn't technology, that is trauma. Every human on my ship has seen a world dissolve into nothingness. We have seen the void eat matter. We carry the weight of holding the line. We came here because we can no longer do it alone. The cascade is accelerating. The star we fixed, it's holding for now. But the pressure is building. We need your energy grids. We need your industrial capacity. We don't need your permission to lead. We need your labor to survive. The audacity of the request stunned the Synod into silence. A species that had just arrived, a species that looked like it was made of dust and fragility, was demanding the resources of the Galactic Empire to fight a ghost story. Vian composed himself. Logic returned. You present a simulation, Vian said coldly. A fabrication. If this threat were real, the precursors would have documented it. The ancient archives mention no such decay. Thorn sighed, a sound of infinite weariness. He gestured to the second case. The precursors, he said, didn't document it because they caused it. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. To speak ill of the precursors, the mythical founders of the galactic jump gates, was heresy. The jump gates, Thorn said, relentless. They punch holes in subspace. You use them daily. You never asked where the displaced energy goes. It goes to the null sector. It accumulates. The entropy cascade is the exhaust pipe of your civilization. You are poisoning the galaxy every time you warp a ship. Lies, Krog roared, leaping to his feet. Blasphemy, the gates are the gift of the gods. Thorn did not flinch. The gates are a shortcut, he said firmly. And there is always a price. We found the precursor homeworld in the null sector. It wasn't destroyed by war. It was eaten by their own waste. We found their warning. It was too late for them. It is not too late for us. He tapped the second case. We have the data logs, we have the mathematics. It is messy, it is terrifying. But it is the truth. He looked at the council, his eyes hard. You feared us because we were unpredictable. You should fear your own history. The Terran Union has developed a new drive technology. Slower, yes, harder, but it heals the rift as it travels. We call it the Stitch Drive. We are offering it to you, but in exchange, you must shut down the gate network. The uproar was instantaneous. Shut down the gates? It would collapse the economy. It would sever the empire. It would isolate every world. It was suicide. The amphitheater erupted in a cacophony of shrieks, roars, and digital screeches. Krog was shouting for the guards. Vian was oscillating in a panic loop. Only Alara remained silent, her misty form pulsing. She looked at the human. She saw the exhaustion in his posture. She saw the truth he carried like a physical weight. The humans were not conquerors. They were martyrs. They were willing to sever the galaxy's veins to save its heart. Thorn waited for the noise to die down. It took a long time. When it finally did, it was because the sensors of the Ethelgard defense grid screamed. A rift was opening, not a ship rift. A tier right there in the high orbit of the capital. The sky above the amphitheater turned a sickening shade of violet. The clouds dissolved. The atmosphere began to bleed away into space. The entropy cascade had jumped. It had followed the human ship's wake, or perhaps it had simply found the weak point where the Council's massive traffic was heaviest. Panic seized the Synod. Delegates trampled each other. Krog stared up at the sky, his plasma lance useless against a hole in reality. "What is that?" he whispered. "That," Thorn said, his voice calm amidst the chaos, "is the bill coming due." He tapped his cane. "My ship can seal it, but we need power, more power than my core has. We need the Council Spire's reactor." Vian looked at the human. "The Spire, it powers the planetary shield. If we divert it, we are defenseless." Thorn looked up at the violet maw consuming the sky. "You are already defenseless, Counselor. The shield stops lasers. It doesn't stop nothingness." He held out his hand. "Give me the command codes, or watch your world turn to ash." It was the ultimate gamble. Vian looked at the sky. He saw the logic. If they did nothing, they died. If they trusted the human, they might live, but they would admit dependence. Krog looked at the enemy that could not be fought. He saw no honor in dying by dissolving. He nodded once, a sharp, brutal motion. Vian transmitted the codes. Thorn didn't gloat. He tapped his comms earpiece. "Command, initiate the Stitch. Divert all local power. Maximum output." The black ship on the landing pad hummed. It didn't lift off. Instead, massive pylons extended from its hull, digging into the earth, connecting to the city's grid. The lights of the capital died. The holographic grandeur of the council chamber vanished, plunging them into twilight. The only light came from the violet horror in the sky and the sudden, blinding white brilliance erupting from the tip of the human ship. A beam of pure, structured energy shot upward. It wasn't a laser. It was a stream of matter creation, a lattice of physics being rewritten. It hit the violet rift. The sound was not of an explosion, but of a scream, the scream of the universe healing a wound. The violet light fought back, pulsing, trying to swallow the white beam. The ground shook. The obsidian pillars cracked. Thorn stood firm, though the wind of the energy displacement whipped his clothes. He watched the sky with the critical eye of a surgeon. For an hour, the battle raged. Not a battle of fleets, but a battle of fundamental forces. The Council watched in terror as the humans burned their own ship systems to the breaking point. The black hull glowed red, then white. They were melting their own vessel to sustain the beam. They were dying to save a planet that had mocked them. Finally, with a thunderclap that shattered every window in the city, the violet rift imploded. The sky snapped back to blue. The stars returned. The beam cut off. The human ship sat on the pad, smoking, ruined, its hull buckled and slagged. Silence returned to the amphitheater, but it was a different silence. It was the silence of awe. The power was gone, so the emergency lights flickered on, casting long, harsh shadows. Thorn slumped, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked smaller now, drained. Vian descended from his dais. He floated across the floor, his crystalline form dim but respectful. He stopped before the human. Krog followed, his footsteps heavy. Alara drifted down. "You saved us," Vian said. "The logic was inescapable. You sacrificed your vessel." "Metal is cheap," Thorn wheezed. "Planets are expensive." Krog looked at the ruined ship. "You possess the strength of warriors," he grunted. "Not of body, but of will. I miscalculated." Alara floated closer. "The gate network," she whispered. "It is truly the cause." "Yes," Thorn said. "We can help you build the Stitch drives. We can help you transition. It will be hard. The galaxy will get bigger again. Travel will take weeks, not hours. Trade will slow. Empires will fracture, but life will continue." The realization settled over the council. The era of the effortless empire was over. The humans had not brought war, they had brought reality. They had popped the bubble of the Council's stagnation. They were not the barbarians at the gate, they were the ones holding the gate shut against the storm. Thorne straightened up, wincing. "The Terran Union requests a glass of water," he said, his voice cracking. "And then we need to talk about the other 6 rifts opening in the midrim." The work was just beginning. In the cycles that followed, the galaxy changed. The Great Gate Network was deactivated system by system. It was a time of chaos, of economic collapse, of isolation. But it was also a time of rebirth. The Terran Union did not rule. They did not take the high seat. They simply worked. They sent their ugly, scarred ships to the edges of the drift, stitching the wounds of space. The Council species, humbled, joined them. The Zolophians applied their logic to optimizing the stitched drives. The Kravik provided the discipline and durability needed for the long, dangerous repair missions. The Osul wove the communication networks that kept the disparate worlds connected without subspace tiers. It was a slow, painful process, but humanity taught the galaxy a lesson that the ancient council had forgotten. There is no such thing as a perfect, static empire. Survival is a constant struggle. It is messy. It requires maintenance. Years later, on the observation deck of the rebuilt spire, Vian stood next to a younger human representative. Thorne had passed away, his fragile biology finally giving out, but his statue stood in the plaza below, not a statue of a conqueror with a sword, but of an old man with a cane looking up. Vian looked at the stars. They looked different now, further apart, harder to reach, but they burned cleanly. There was no violet rot at the edges. "He told us," Vian said to the young human, "that he feared nothing but the silence." The human nodded. "We don't fear the silence either, High Counselor. We just know that you have to make noise to keep it away." "We thought you were primitive," Vian mused, "because you had not mastered the easy path. We did not understand that you had chosen the hard path because it was the only one that led anywhere." "The easy path is a circle," the human said. "It just leads back to the beginning. We prefer the line. It goes on forever." The alien and the human stood together, watching the sun set over a world that should have died, saved by the stubborn, illogical, enduring will of the species that refused to accept the end. The Galactic Council had feared nothing until they met humans. And then, for the first time, they learned to fear the right things, and in doing so, they learned how to survive. The fear was the gift. The fear was the beginning of wisdom. And out in the dark, the stitched ships burned their engines, sewing the universe back together, one star at a time. The work would never be done, and that, the humans said, was the point. A finished universe is a dead universe. A living one is always under construction. The transition from the High Synod's acceptance to the operational reality of the Alliance was not seamless. The deactivation of the Gate Network was not merely a flip of a switch. It was the dismantling of a civilization's nervous system. Riots broke out on the pleasure worlds of the Inner Rim, planets that had relied on imported luxury from 1,000 light-years away. Food shortages struck the hive worlds of the Kravik Dominion. The Osul information networks, once instantaneous, fractured into delayed packets of data carried by courier ships. The galaxy went dark, and in that darkness, the true nature of the Terran Union was revealed. They were not just engineers, they were logistics masters of the apocalypse. While the Council debated how to quell the riots, human fleets arrived not with weapons, but with hydroponic modules and atmospheric scrubbers. They didn't bring luxuries, they brought survival. They taught the pleasure worlds how to grow their own grain. They taught the Kravik how to recycle their industrial waste into nutrient paste. It was unglamorous, gritty work. It lacked the elegance of the Council's golden age, but it worked. On the moon of Typhon IV, a Kravik stronghold, a human engineer named Sarah Vance stood knee-deep in freezing mud, wrenching a bolt on a geothermal tap. Beside her, a Kravik warrior named Grotus watched with disdain. "This is slave labor," Grotus hissed, his breath misting in the cold air. "We were conquerors, now we dig in the dirt like larvae." Sarah didn't look up. She wiped grease from her forehead, leaving a black smear. "You were conquerors who were starving," she said flatly. "You're farmers who are eating. Pick a side, big guy," she grunted, heaving on the wrench. "The gates made you soft. You forgot that a planet is supposed to support life, not just host it." Grotus watched her muscles strain, the sheer stubbornness of the small mammal. He stepped forward, his massive claw encompassing the wrench, and turned it with a single, effortless motion. The vent hissed and heat flooded the chamber. Sarah grinned up at him. "See, teamwork. Now grab the shovel." Grotus looked at the shovel. He looked at the human. For the first time in his life, he felt a strange sensation. It wasn't pride in battle. It was the satisfaction of competence. He picked up the shovel. This scene played out across 1,000 worlds. The humans brought a philosophy of local resilience. They argued that a civilization dependent on instant travel was fragile. A civilization that could stand on its own 2 feet on any rock was unbreakable. The cultural friction was immense. The Zalothians found human redundancy infuriatingly inefficient. Why build 3 backup generators? A Zalothian architect asked during the reconstruction of the orbital docks at Centauri. The probability of primary failure is 0.04%. The human foreman just tapped the clipboard. Because things go wrong, Crystal Face, and when they do, I don't want to be the one explaining to the captain why we're drifting. 2 weeks later, a solar flare knocked out the primary and secondary grids. The tertiary generator kicked in. The Zalothian architect never questioned the foreman again. But the greatest challenge lay in the null sector itself. The stitching was not a passive act. It was a combat operation against physics. The entropy rifts were active. They lashed out. They spawned anomalies, gravity wells that wandered, pockets of time that accelerated aging, and echoes of the civilizations they had consumed. The Stitch ships had to fly into these storms, deploy the stabilizers, and hold position while the reality welding took place. It was terrifying duty. Captain Hideo Kovic commanded the UNS Gibraltar, a heavy cruiser modified for Stitch duty. His crew was a mix now, mostly human, but with a Kravik tactical officer and a Zalothian navigator. They were deep in the void margin, tracking a Class 5 rift that was threatening to swallow a nebula. The tension on the bridge was palpable. The viewscreen showed a swirling vortex of anti-light, a hole in the universe that looked like a bruising eye. Gravity shear increasing, the Zalothian navigator Xyle 7 chimed. Hull integrity at 80%. We are drifting into the event horizon. Hold the line, Kovic said, his voice calm. He was drinking coffee from a chipped mug. Deploy the anchors. Anchors deploying, the Kravik officer Vrog barked. The rift is reacting, it perceives us. That was the terrifying truth the Council was learning. The entropy wasn't just a natural disaster. It had a semi-sentience. It was a hunger. As the anchors bit into the surrounding spacetime, the rift lashed out with tendrils of purple energy. The ship shuddered violently. Sparks rained from the ceiling. Shields down to 40%, Vrog roared. We cannot sustain this proximity. We leave now, the nebula collapses, Kovic said. And if the nebula goes, the shockwave hits the colony worlds in the outer rim. We stay. Illogical, Xyle 7 stated, though his fingers flew across the console. Survival probability is less than 12%. Never tell a human the odds, Kovic muttered. Route auxiliary power to the structural integrity fields, override the safeties. The reactor will melt, Xyle 7 protested. Then it melts, do it. The Gibraltar groaned like a dying beast. The metal screamed. Inside the ship, the temperature spiked. Crew members in the engineering bay passed out from the heat, dragged to safety by their comrades. But they held. The Stitch beam fired, a lance of white purity driving into the purple heart of the rift. The struggle lasted for 10 minutes that felt like 10 years. The rift convulsed, shrank, and finally, with a silent flash, sealed shut. The Gibraltar drifted, dead in the water, its hull scorched black, its engines fused. Silence on the bridge. Then the sound of Vrog laughing, a guttural, booming sound. We live, the Kravik roared. By the blood of the ancestors, we live. Xyle 7 looked at his console. Rift neutralized, nebula stable, probability of survival readjusted to 100%. The crystalline being looked at Captain Kovic. You acted with 0 variance for self-preservation. Why? Kovic set down his coffee cup. His hand was shaking slightly. Because it's my job, Xyle, and because someone has to keep the lights on. This heroism cemented the alliance. The humans were crazy, yes. They were reckless, but they were the shield. The Council species began to adopt this ethos. Kravik warriors began painting human symbols on their armor, the ancient symbol of the Red Cross, or the gear. Xylophian logic nodes began incorporating human intuition variables into their algorithms. The Osul began using their spy networks to locate lost colonies and coordinate rescue efforts. 5 years after the Great Landing at Ethelgard, a new crisis emerged. The signal returned. The original transmission that had led the humans to the null sector, the one they thought was a distress call from the precursors, changed. It wasn't a loop anymore. It was a countdown. Thorne's successor, Ambassador Alina Ross, stood before the reformed council. The chamber was different now, less ornate. More screens showing repair schedules, crop yields, and rift status. The atmosphere was working, not ceremonial. We have analyzed the new signal, Ross said. It is coming from outside the galaxy, from the dark space between the galaxies. Vian, who was still High Counselor, though much changed, looked at the data. Another rift. No, Ross said. A ship, a massive one. It matches the energy signature of the entropy. Fear rippled through the chamber, but it was controlled fear now. The source, Krog said, his voice low, the architects of the decay. It seems the entropy wasn't just waste, Ross admitted. It was a weapon or a harvesting tool, and the harvesters are coming to see why the flow has stopped. The room went silent. The humans had stopped the leak, and in doing so, they had alerted the plumbers. How long? Vian asked. 10 years, Ross said. They are traveling at sublight speeds, but they are immense. Based on the signal density, it is a migration fleet. They consume galaxies. The old council would have panicked. They would have fled. They would have activated the gates and tried to run to another spiral arm, tearing the universe apart in their wake. But this was not the old council. They had met humans. Krog stood up. He didn't look at the other counselors. He looked at the map. 10 years, he grunted. Enough time to build a fleet, not a fleet of luxury yachts, a fleet of war. Vian nodded. We have the Stitch technology. We can weaponize it. If we can seal a rift, we can sever a ship. Ilara spoke, her voice like steel silk. My weavers will find their blind spots. We will know them before they arrive. Ross smiled. It was the same grim, determined smile that Thorne had worn. The Terran Union has plans for a planetary defense cannon. We call it the slingshot. It uses a star's gravity well as a lens. We never built it because it was too dangerous. But if we're fighting planet eaters. Build it, Vian said. We will provide the resources. The story of the Galactic Council was no longer a story of stagnation. It was a story of preparation. The galaxy turned into a fortress. The humans, once the unpredictable anomaly, became the architects of the defense. They taught the aliens how to fight dirty, how to hide in the mud, how to endure. The 10 years passed in a blur of industry. When the harvesters arrived, they did not find a fragmented, fearful galaxy ripe for consumption. They found a phalanx. They found the Kravik fleets, armored in human alloy, holding the line. They found Xylofian drone swarms, moving with chaotic, human-programmed patterns that baffled the harvester AI. They found Osul saboteurs who had infiltrated their vanguard. And waiting in the center at the null sector margin was the Terran fleet. The indomitable spirit had been rebuilt, larger and uglier than before. It led a combined armada of every species, a chaotic, mismatched, beautiful wall of defiance. The battle for the galaxy was not won in a day. It took years. It was a grinding, brutal war of attrition. Planet. S were lost, heroes died, but the line held. The harvesters, ancient cosmic horrors that had eaten a dozen galaxies, found something they had never encountered before, a prey that refused to die, a prey that stitched its own wounds shut and kept fighting. In the final engagement, the Harvester mothership, a vessel the size of a moon, attempted to open a massive entropy rift to swallow the Ethelgard system. It was the same tactic that had destroyed the precursors. But this time, the Gibraltar and 1,000 other Stitch ships were waiting. They didn't just seal the rift. They inverted it. They turned the Harvester's weapon back on itself, using the Stitch beams to lock the enemy vessel in a stasis field of absolute order, freezing it in time. The war ended not with a bang, but with a sudden, crushing silence as the enemy fleet, cut off from their command hub, shut down. The victory celebration was not held in the grand amphitheater. It was held in the ruins of the battlefield, among the debris and the stars. Vian, Krog, and Ross stood on the hull of the captured Harvester ship, looking out at the galaxy they had saved. We feared you, Vian admitted, looking at the human. When you first arrived, we thought you were the end of us. Ross looked at the scars on the Kravik's armor, the cracks in Vian's crystal, and the prosthetic arm she now wore. We are the end of you, she said softly. The end of the you that was afraid, the end of the you that hid behind walls. And what are we now? Krog asked, looking at the mixed crews celebrating below, humans, Kravik, Xylofians, Osul, sharing food, patching wounds, laughing. Now, Ross said, looking at the infinite dark that still lay beyond the galaxy's edge, where other threats surely waited. Now we are the ones who knock back. The galaxy had changed. It was scarred. It was tired. It was wiser. The Council feared nothing anymore, not because they were arrogant, but because they knew that no matter what came out of the dark, they would face it standing up together. The humans had taught them the most dangerous secret of all, that even in the face of the inevitable, you can always choose to disobey. And somewhere on a small, rebuilt agricultural world, a statue of Elias Thorne stood in a garden. The inscription at the base didn't list his titles. It didn't list the wars won. It simply read, "The galaxy is broken. Come help us fix it." The message was beaming out towards other galaxies, a new signal in the dark, not a warning, an invitation. The humans weren't done yet. There was a whole universe to stitch back together. The end was just the beginning.